Hi folks, happy February. That means it's Black History Month. It has come to my attention here in the home office that there are still some white folks out there asking this ridiculous question. You're really asking that question? Still? Then let's answer it. See these posters and political buttons back here, which are part of a collection that I've gathered over the years. They are somewhat representative of American history. Certainly over the last 100+ years. 150 years if you count this Ulysses Grant pin. Notice anything about them? Definitely old. Not all dead. Yes, they are overwhelmingly white folks. Do I have to say this? American history is already overwhelmingly about white people. The white people who founded the country, the white folks who seceded from the Union in order to preserve slavery, the industrialists, the internationalists, the Cold Warriors, overwhelmingly white people. American history is already about white people. They don't need a month. They've already had 245 years, give or take. And you're worried about 1 month of Black history? Why are you worried about Black history? I could probably come up with some reasons. None of them would be particularly attractive. Let's don't do that. Instead, let's just celebrate February. Don't be afraid of Black history. It's not going to hurt you.